The village celebration was in full swing. Drums beat loudly, and voices rang out in joy as people gathered to honor the harvest. A young boy sat beside his father, watching the festivities with wide eyes, his heart racing with the excitement of the moment. The air was thick with the scent of roasted meats, sweet fruits, and freshly brewed palm wine. Laughter bubbled up around them, but the boy's focus was elsewhere. His gaze wandered from the dancing crowd to his father, who seemed unusually still. Jide's eyes were locked on a woman standing at the edge of the crowd, her movements fluid as she walked into the celebration. The woman's presence was like a shadow that spread across the gathering, pulling the gaze of every person in the area, yet none more so than Jide. He did not blink, did not look away. His attention was drawn to her as if he could not control it, his face hardening as the memories of their past whispered back into his mind. The boy, Tunde, noticed his father's stillness. He glanced at the woman, then at his father again. He had never seen Jide this way. His father, always the strong and steady figure, now looked uneasy. Tunde's innocent curiosity stirred within him. He had never known his father to show such vulnerability. "Why are you looking at her bum?" Tunde asked, his voice loud and clear, cutting through the sounds of celebration. The question hung in the air, its innocence too pure, its timing too sharp. The drums faltered for a second, and the music seemed to stop as if the earth itself had paused. The villagers, mid-laughter, mid-dance, suddenly fell silent. Eyes turned toward the pair, father and son, expecting, waiting for a reaction. The woman noticed the shift, the subtle tremor in the crowd. Her gaze moved toward Jide, but when their eyes briefly met, he looked away, his face flushing red. The villagers waited. The question had dropped like a stone into still water, and now ripples spread. Gasps filled the air. Some eyes narrowed in suspicion, others widened with disbelief. The woman, Amara, stood, her posture stiffening as she became acutely aware of the weight of every eye on her. She had returned to the village only recently, but now, it seemed, her return had stirred up far more than she had expected. Jide's hands trembled slightly, but he clenched them into fists, trying to hold onto his dignity. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. The pride that had once made him the respected elder of the village felt fragile now. The years of wisdom, the years of guidance to others, seemed to crumble under the weight of his son's innocent question. How could he explain? How could he hide the truth from Tunde, from the village? Tunde's eyes remained fixed on his father. "What's wrong, father? Why don't you want to answer me?" he pressed, not understanding the turmoil he had just unleashed. Jide's gaze darted toward Amara again, but he could not hold it. He could not look her in the eyes. He had chosen a different path long ago, and now that path was before him again. The woman he had once loved, the woman who had once captured his heart, was here, and everything that had been buried in the past was rising to the surface. The whispers began. Low murmurs passed from one person to the next, like wind stirring dry leaves. "So it's true then, Jide and Amara, it's been years, but the way he looks at her, do you remember? There were talks, rumors." The gossip spread quickly, each word fueled by suspicion and excitement. Some villagers laughed nervously, while others exchanged knowing glances. It was clear to everyone that something had passed between Jide and Amara, something unsaid, something hidden from the view of the younger generations. Tunde, still confused, asked again, his voice rising with each word. "Why are you looking at her like that, father?" Jide felt the heat of the village's gaze upon him. His hands clenched harder, his nails biting into his palms. He tried to smile, but it was weak. "There is nothing, Tunde. Nothing at all," he said, but his voice betrayed him. He tried to redirect his son, turning him toward the dance circle, where children were laughing and playing, urging him to join them. "Come, Tunde, look at the dancers. Don't focus on her." But it was too late. The question had been asked. The seed of doubt had been planted. And Tunde, relentless in his search for truth, was not about to let it go. "But why were you staring at her? Why were you looking at her bum?" The words repeated like a drumbeat, louder now, more insistent. The woman Amara shifted where she stood, her eyes avoiding Jide's gaze. She knew the story. She had lived it. She had once been part of the life Jide had built before the family, before the village's expectations. Now that past was dragging itself out into the open. The villagers watched, some in curiosity, others in judgment, waiting to see what Jide would do. The weight of the question hung heavily in the air, more pressing than the dance, more deafening than the drums. Every eye was fixed on him. The once respected elder now stood at the center of a storm he could not control. Tunde, innocent and unknowing, had unknowingly pulled the thread that would unravel a long-hidden secret. The gathering, once filled with laughter and joy, was now filled with tension. Would Jide admit the truth? Would he allow his pride to fall? Or would he maintain his silence and risk the humiliation of being unable to face his past? The village waited. The air was thick with anticipation. Jide was a pillar of the village, a man whose reputation stretched far and wide. He had spent his life earning the respect of his people, known for his wisdom and the strength that came with his leadership. As an elder, he had guided the village through countless challenges, his decisions shaping the way things were done. His house, solid and sturdy, was a reflection of his own character. His words carried weight, and his presence demanded respect. He was a man of discipline, integrity, and honor. And so Tunde, his son, had always looked up to him with admiration. To Tunde, his father was more than just a man. He was a legend. He had been taught from a young age to follow his father's example, to speak only when necessary, to respect tradition, and to act with the village's best interests at heart. But Tunde, a curious boy full of questions and innocence, did not fully understand the complexities of his father's world. His youthful mind was unclouded by the secrets that weighed heavily on Jide. For Tunde, his father was simply a hero, someone who knew all the answers. But the question, Tunde's innocent question, would soon change that. Amara had come back to the village, her return stirring up old emotions, old memories. She was strikingly beautiful, with a confidence that could not be ignored. Her presence carried an air of mystery, one that the villagers couldn't help but notice. The older generation, those who had lived through the years when Amara and Jide's names were often whispered together, knew the story well. Long before Tunde had been born, Jide and Amara had shared a deep connection. They had been close, too close, some whispered. But Jide had chosen a different path. He had chosen his family, his place in the village, over the love he had shared with Amara. It was a choice that had been made years ago, and the village had moved on, or so it seemed. But Amara's return was like a stone thrown into calm waters, sending ripples across the village. The whispers began again, quieter this time, but still alive. Some villagers looked at Jide with sympathy, understanding the difficult position he found himself in. Others mocked him behind his back, making light of his discomfort. But no one could deny the tension that simmered between him and Amara, a tension that could be felt by all who were near. Jide, the once unshakable elder, now found himself trapped between his past and his present. His interactions with Amara had become strained, awkward. He could barely look her in the eye. The smooth words of the past no longer came so easily, and his heart, which had been steady for years, now thudded with discomfort whenever she was near. Tunde, ever observant, began to notice the strange behavior. He had always thought of his father as the strong, unflappable man everyone admired, but now, something was off. His father avoided Amara, his eyes constantly searching for ways to leave her presence without saying a word. There were moments when Jide's shoulders seemed to tighten, his hands clenching into fists as he looked at her from a distance. The calm and composed man he had always known was slipping away, and Tunde couldn't understand why. Why does father act so strange around her? Tunde wondered aloud to his mother, who simply gave him a knowing smile and told him to focus on his food. But Tunde was not so easily deterred. His questions were sharp and persistent, and his young mind was determined to find an answer. The village, as always, was steeped in tradition. Its values were built on loyalty, respect, and the sanctity of marriage. Family bonds were sacred, and the idea of infidelity, even a past relationship that no longer existed, was a stain that could not easily be erased. The villagers held each other to these high standards, and any deviation from these norms was quickly noticed. They judged each other not only for their actions, but for their ability to uphold the honor of the community. In a place where everyone knew each other's business, reputation was everything. Jide had always been a man of unyielding integrity. His decisions, his marriage, and his family had been his pride, and to risk it all over something that had been long buried seemed impossible. But Amara's return brought that buried past back to the surface, and with it, the unresolved emotions that Jide had tried to forget. As the day of the celebration wore on, the villagers began to notice more than just Jide's discomfort. Whispers grew louder, the gossip more pointed. Some found it amusing, laughing behind their hands, while others exchanged knowing glances, wondering if the old flame between Jide and Amara would reignite. Tunde, though, remained oblivious to the full weight of what was happening. He didn't understand why his father looked away whenever Amara walked past, why he didn't speak to her the way he spoke to others. His questions became sharper, more insistent, as his curiosity turned into suspicion. He could see that something was wrong, but the truth was still out of reach. As the sun began to set and the celebration moved toward its end, the village had already begun to form its opinions. Some thought that Jide had acted wrongly, letting a past love taint his present, while others believed that Amara had no business returning to a place where she had left so many unresolved issues. And for Tunde, the evening would end not with joy, but with confusion, as his innocent question had ignited a chain of events that none of them could predict. Jide's life, built on respect and integrity, was now teetering on the edge. The village, with all its rules and traditions, was watching. And Tunde, the boy who had only wanted answers, was unknowingly about to uncover a past his father had hoped to keep buried forever. The day after the celebration, Tunde's curiosity intensified. He couldn't shake the image of his father's discomfort around Amara, and the more he tried to distract himself, the more his mind returned to the unanswered question. What was it about her that made Jide, usually so composed, behave as if he were carrying a heavy burden? He tried to approach his father again, his voice casual but filled with determination. "Father, why do you avoid Amara?" Tunde asked, his tone innocent yet persistent. Jide, who had been busy with preparations for the next day's work, sighed deeply, his mind racing for a way to deflect. "Tunde," Jide began, his voice steady but weary, "there are things about life you're not ready to understand yet. Focus on your studies, or go play with the other children. There's no need to ask about such matters." But Tunde, ever inquisitive, wasn't easily deterred. "Why can't I know? You always tell me to learn about life, but you don't talk to me about things that matter. Amara, she's important to you, isn't she?" Jide's eyes darkened, and he tried to mask his discomfort with a tight smile. "She's a visitor, Tunde, that's all." But even as Jide spoke, he knew that the truth could no longer be contained. His son's innocent persistence was like a crack in a dam that had been holding back a flood of emotions, memories, and regret. He had hoped that time, the passage of years, would bury the past, but Amara's return had stirred everything he thought he had left behind. As the day wore on, Tunde's curiosity grew, and he began to look for answers on his own. While playing near the village square, he overheard a conversation between two elderly women. They were sitting by a fire, preparing a meal and speaking in low voices. Tunde crept closer, unable to resist eavesdropping. "I remember when Jide was younger, before he married Funky," one of the women said, stirring the pot in front of her. "He and Amara were very close. The two of them were inseparable back then. I always wondered if they would marry." The other woman nodded, her face grim. "Yes, but he chose Funky in the end. I think he felt guilty. Amara, she was always too strong, too independent for him. But you can see the way he looks at her now. There's still something there." Tunde's heart raced as the pieces began to fall into place. His father, Jide, the man he had always admired, had once been in love with Amara, the same woman who now stood in front of him, making his father uneasy. It was like a jolt of electricity running through his veins. This was the truth he had been searching for. He felt a mix of betrayal and confusion, unsure of what to do with this newfound knowledge. But before Tunde could process everything, another voice interrupted. "Don't talk like that," the second woman said sharply. "Jide is a good man, a faithful husband. Amara? Well, she never really left. She always kept a piece of him with her." Tunde's mind was spinning. He didn't know what to think or how to feel. He knew his father had always been a figure of strength, the one who made decisions and led with honor. But this revelation shook him to his core. He had always believed that his parents' love was unbreakable, that their marriage was strong, but now everything seemed uncertain. Meanwhile, Amara, who had sensed Jide's discomfort, began to take advantage of the situation. She began speaking to him more frequently, her words laced with nostalgia and subtle manipulation. She would laugh softly, recalling old times they had shared, moments when they had been together without the weight of responsibility. Her voice was like honey, sweet and inviting, stirring memories Jide had tried so hard to forget. "You remember the time we went to the river, Jide?" Amara would ask, her gaze lingering on him. "It was so peaceful, just the two of us, no one else around. I often wonder if we could ever go back to that time before everything changed." Jide's response was always the same, polite but distant. "That was a long time ago, Amara. Things are different now." But his words rang hollow, even to him. The memories of their past together, the shared laughter, the warmth of her touch, those memories haunted him. His loyalty to Funky, his duty as a father to Tunde, created a constant inner conflict. But Amara's presence pulled at him like a magnet, tempting him to forget the responsibilities he had built his life upon. It wasn't long before Jide's internal struggle began to manifest itself more clearly. He found himself avoiding Funky at times, withdrawing into his own thoughts. At the same time, he couldn't deny the guilt that gnawed at him whenever he was near Amara. He was reminded of the passion they once shared, a passion that seemed to have never quite faded. The weight of that guilt was unbearable, and he felt as though the walls of his carefully constructed life were starting to crumble. Funky, ever observant, began to notice the subtle changes in Jide. His moods had become unpredictable, and he often seemed distant. She overheard Tunde asking about loyalty and love, and her suspicions grew. The tight-knit bond they had once shared was beginning to fray at the edges, and Funky couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She knew her husband too well to ignore the signs. The return of Amara, with all her memories and unresolved feelings, was undoubtedly having an effect on him. One evening, as they sat together in their home, Funky confronted Jide. "You've been distant lately, Jide," she said softly, her eyes searching his face for answers. "I can feel it. Something is troubling you. Is it Amara? Is she stirring up things you'd rather not face?" Jide's face hardened, but inside he felt his world shaking. He wanted to lie, to reassure her, but he couldn't. "It's nothing," he replied, his voice tight. "Just tired, that's all." But Funky wasn't convinced. "Jide, I know you better than anyone. If there's something you need to tell me, you can." Jide remained silent, the truth too painful to say. The silence between them was deafening, and in that moment, Jide realized that his past, which he had hoped to keep buried, was threatening to tear apart the very foundation of his family. The village, too, had begun to take notice. Whispers spread like wildfire. Some villagers saw Amara as a disruptor, someone who had returned to claim what was once hers, while others viewed her as a victim of circumstances, a woman wronged by a man who had chosen another life. The elders, especially, seemed divided, some expressing sympathy for Jide, while others wondered if Amara's return would finally force Jide to confront the decisions he had made long ago. Tunde, still unaware of the full weight of his actions, continued to ask questions. His innocent inquiries, once thought to be the musings of a curious child, had now become the catalyst for unraveling the past. The elders, once hesitant to speak openly, now began to share their own versions of the story, their tongues loosened by the boy's persistence. Tunde had unknowingly become a messenger of uncomfortable truths, his questions stirring the village into a frenzy. As the truth slowly came to light, the relationship between father and son began to crack. Tunde's newfound understanding of his father's past left him conflicted. He couldn't reconcile the man he had always admired with the man who had once loved another woman so deeply. The divide between Jide and Tunde grew, each unable to fully bridge the gap that had been created by the truth. Jide's struggle to maintain control over his life, his family, and his reputation had reached its boiling point. His past and present were colliding, and the weight of it all was threatening to crush him. The village was watching, and Jide was beginning to realize that his once solid foundation was now in danger of crumbling. The question was no longer just about loyalty, it was about identity, reputation, and the bonds that held everything together. Amara's public confrontation, unveiling the past. The village meeting was supposed to be a moment for celebration, a gathering where Jide, as the respected elder, would speak with authority and guide his people. But as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the village square, Amara saw the perfect opportunity to make her move. Standing up in the middle of the gathering, she caught everyone's attention. Her voice, laced with tension, cut through the murmur of the crowd. "Jide," she called, her eyes never leaving his. "You owe me, and all of us, the truth. Acknowledge what we once shared. Acknowledge what you still feel." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Amara's words hung in the air, thick with history and unspoken emotions. Everyone turned to Jide, waiting for him to respond. The elders looked on with raised eyebrows, and the younger villagers exchanged nervous glances. Jide, whose authority had always been unquestioned, now found himself standing on a precipice, with his past and present colliding in front of everyone he knew. Jide's moment of truth, confessing the past. For a moment, Jide said nothing. His gaze shifted toward the ground, his mind racing as he processed the weight of Amara's challenge. His chest tightened as memories of their once passionate relationship flooded his mind. The love they had shared was undeniable, but that was a lifetime ago. He had made a choice, one that shaped his future and his family. With a deep sigh, Jide finally spoke, his voice carrying the weight of the truth he had kept buried for so long. "Yes, Amara," he said, his tone heavy. "We were in love. We shared a bond I cannot deny, but I chose to marry Funky because that was the future I wanted. A family, stability, a future for my children. You were part of my past, but she is my present and future." The confession hung in the air like a heavy cloud. The villagers were silent, absorbing the gravity of Jide's words. Some looked at Amara, others at Jide, their faces filled with mixed emotions. Surprise, shock, empathy, and even judgment. Jide had bared his soul, exposing a part of himself that no one had seen before. Tunde's unwavering question, "Why were you looking at her bum?" In the midst of the tense silence, Tunde's voice broke through. With the innocent curiosity of a child, he asked the question that had been gnawing at him for days, a question that no one dared to ask. "Why were you looking at her bum, Daddy?" Tunde's words echoed in the quiet space, and for a split second, it felt as though time itself had stopped. All eyes turned to Jide, whose face flushed with embarrassment. The question was simple, yet it carried the weight of the entire situation. Tunde didn't understand the complexity of what had just been revealed, but his innocent words forced Jide to confront the reality of what had been happening in his heart. The villagers waited for Jide's response, the tension thick in the air. The question had stripped away the walls Jide had carefully built around himself, exposing him in front of his son and the community. The tipping point, Jide struggled to maintain his dignity. Jide stood there, struggling to find the words. His pride, his authority as a village elder, and his dignity were all on the line. He had been forced to admit his past, and now, in front of everyone, his son was questioning his actions. The weight of it all pressed down on him, threatening to break him. For a brief moment, Jide thought he might crumble under the pressure. His past choices, his mistakes, were laid bare, and in the eyes of his son, his integrity was now in question. He could feel the eyes of the village on him, waiting for him to answer, to reclaim his position, to restore the respect he had always commanded. But the words wouldn't come. His mind raced. How could he explain this to his son? How could he justify his actions without betraying everything he had worked so hard to build? Funky's intervention, a calm yet powerful resolution. Just as it seemed Jide would falter, Funke, his wife, stood up. Her movements were calm, deliberate. She walked toward the front of the meeting, her presence radiating strength. There was no panic in her eyes, no anger, just a quiet, unwavering confidence that seemed to settle the crowd. When she spoke, her voice was soft, yet powerful. "Jide," she said, addressing him directly, "I knew of your past with Amara. I forgave you long ago. What matters now is the love you have for me, for our children, for the life we've built together. Your past is just that, the past. What matters is the present and the choices we make today." Her words were simple but profound. She didn't need to shout or confront. She didn't need to defend herself or her marriage. She spoke with the wisdom of a woman who had seen the pain but had chosen to rise above it. The crowd was silent, and a wave of respect washed over the gathering. Some villagers nodded in understanding, others whispered to each other, their opinions shifting. Funky had done what no one expected. She had given her husband the strength to stand tall once more. She had reminded everyone that love is not defined by past mistakes, but by the commitment one makes in the present. A village's mixed reactions, respect for Funky's forgiveness. The villagers, who had once whispered behind closed doors, now looked at Funky with a new sense of admiration. Some, particularly the women, were moved by her grace. They saw a woman who had chosen forgiveness, a woman who had decided that love could survive even the harshest truths. Others, however, couldn't help but feel conflicted, caught between the scandalous nature of GD's past and the dignity with which Funky had handled the situation. But despite the mixed reactions, there was a shared understanding among the villagers, the power of forgiveness and the importance of loyalty. Tunde's reflection, understanding loyalty and love. As the dust began to settle, Tunde looked at his parents, seeing them in a new light. He had always thought love was simple, that it was about the feelings you had for someone. But now he understood that love was more than that. It was about choices. It was about loyalty. It was about accepting flaws and choosing to move forward together despite the past. Tunde's question, once innocent, now felt like the key that unlocked a deeper understanding in him. He realized that love wasn't perfect. It was messy, complicated, and full of mistakes. But it was also about the bonds we choose to honor, the people we decide to stand by, and the decisions we make to move forward together. The village's quiet consensus, respect and forgiveness. As the meeting came to an end, the villagers began to disperse, their whispers replaced with a quiet respect. The gossip that once clouded the air had shifted to something more profound. A collective understanding of the complexity of relationships, the power of forgiveness, and the resilience of love. Jide's past would never fully be erased, and Amara's presence would always linger in the village. But the villagers now saw Jide not as a man defined by his mistakes, but as a man who had made a choice to honor his present and his family. And in the eyes of his son, Jide had regained something far more important than his authority. He had regained his place in his son's heart. As the sun set on the village, the community moved forward, with a renewed sense of unity and understanding. The lessons of love, loyalty, and forgiveness would stay with them long after the meeting had ended. The village quietens, gossip fades, but the drama lingers. The days that followed the public confrontation were tense, but the gossip that had once plagued the village began to fade. The villagers resumed their usual lives, tending to their farms, attending gatherings, and continuing their daily routines. Yet, the event had left an indelible mark. Whispers of Jide's past with Amara still lingered in the air, but they had shifted from judgment to curiosity. Some admired Jide for his courage in admitting the truth, while others were left to wonder about the complexities of his life. Though his reputation remained largely intact, the drama had redefined how the village viewed Jide. The elders, who once respected him unconditionally, now saw him through a more human lens. The experience had changed him, and in doing so, had reshaped his role within the community. The village moved on, but the echoes of the confrontation remained, reminding everyone that the past could not be easily erased. Jide's personal growth, embracing the past, embracing the future. Jide, however, did not leave the incident unscathed. The weight of his past had caused him to confront parts of himself he had long ignored. Through the struggle, he learned that true strength did not lie in avoiding or denying past mistakes, but in accepting them and learning from them. It was a lesson that Jide had to learn the hard way, the realization that being a man wasn't about hiding his flaws, but about owning them and doing better in the future. His internal growth was not instant, but it was profound. Slowly, he began to embrace his past with Amara, not as a source of shame, but as part of what had shaped him. He saw how that chapter, while painful, had ultimately led him to Funky, and through her, he had found a love that was steady, enduring, and true. In his role as husband and father, Jide now understood that the strength of a man was measured not by his ability to escape his past, but by his ability to confront it and grow from it. Tunde's witnessing of reconciliation, the bridge to understanding. For Tunde, the journey was equally transformative. As a young boy, he had always viewed love through the simple lens of admiration for his parents. But after witnessing the raw emotions and the complexities of their relationship, he began to grasp that love wasn't always clean or easy. It wasn't just about happy moments or unwavering loyalty. It was about forgiveness, growth, and accepting the mistakes that came with being human. Tunde had seen his parents reconcile in a way that seemed almost magical, a quiet yet profound healing. The tension between Jide and Funky had begun to ease, and their bond had grown stronger. It was through witnessing this transformation that Tunde understood that love wasn't perfect, but it was worth fighting for. His perception of his parents shifted, and he saw them not as invincible figures, but as people who had faced their flaws head-on and emerged stronger for it. As he looked at his father now, Tunde saw someone who had stumbled but had learned to rise again. And in that, he found a new kind of respect. The image of his father, once untouchable and infallible in his eyes, was now human, but it was a humanity that was stronger for having faced its imperfections. Amara's departure, closing the chapter. Amara, too, had her own moment of reckoning. With the truth now out in the open and Jide's commitment to Funky reaffirmed, she realized that her time in the village had come to an end. She could no longer remain in the place where she had once been so deeply connected to Jide. The village had witnessed the end of their relationship, and it was time for her to move on. Before she left, Amara shared a brief moment with Jide. It wasn't filled with words of regret or longing, but rather a quiet acknowledgement of their shared history. There was no anger, no bitterness, only the understanding that their love had once been real, but had now become part of the past. Amara's departure signified the final closing of that chapter in Jide's life, and with it, the opportunity for both of them to fully move forward. Jide's lesson to Tunde, the true test of manhood. In the quiet aftermath, Jide took the time to explain to Tunde the lesson he had learned through this ordeal. Sitting with his son, Jide looked him in the eye and said, "No one is perfect, Tunde. Everyone makes mistakes, even me. But the true test of manhood isn't in hiding those mistakes. It's in facing them, owning them, and making amends. We all have our pasts, but what matters is the future we choose to build. The choices you make today shape the man you will become tomorrow." Tunde listened intently, his youthful innocence now tempered with a growing wisdom. He understood that the lessons his father had imparted went far beyond the confrontation with Amara. It was about growth, responsibility, and the strength to change. The words struck deep within him, cementing his respect for his father. Tunde knew now that his father's strength didn't come from perfection, but from his willingness to confront and correct his mistakes. The final scene, family united, Tunde's newfound respect. The story concludes with the family standing together, united in a way they hadn't been before. The tension between Jide and Funky had dissolved, and their relationship was stronger than ever. They had faced their struggles, and through forgiveness and mutual respect, they had emerged with a deeper understanding of one another. Tunde, now with a newfound respect for both of his parents, looked at his father differently. He no longer saw Jide as a man who had it all figured out, but as a man who had learned from his mistakes and had become a better person for it. The lessons of love, betrayal, and forgiveness would stay with Tunde for the rest of his life, guiding him as he grew into a man who understood the complexities of relationships and the importance of loyalty. As the family stood together, the sun setting in the background, there was a sense of peace. Not perfection, but a peace rooted in understanding, growth, and the promise of a future built on stronger foundations. Tunde, with a new respect for both love and the struggles that came with it, walked beside his parents into the future, ready to carry the lessons he had learned into his own life. The weight of past choices, confronting the consequences. As the story draws to a close, a deeper reflection on the choices made by each character provides insight into the true heart of the narrative. Jide, the patriarch of the family, had long been admired for his wisdom and strength. Yet his past, particularly his unresolved relationship with Amara, had cast a shadow on his life, one he had hoped to bury forever. But as the story unfolds, he is forced to confront the consequences of his earlier decisions. The truth, no matter how well hidden, will always find a way to the surface. Jide's struggle is a poignant reminder that the choices we make today shape the lives we must face tomorrow. The decisions he made in his younger years, though buried deep in the past, had far-reaching effects on his present. As he grapples with the impact of his actions, Jide realizes that no matter how much he wished to avoid them, his past had to be addressed, both for his own peace and for the well-being of his family. His growth reflects the truth that we cannot escape the consequences of our choices, but we can choose how to respond to them. Tunde's Awakening, a lesson in love, loyalty, and redemption. Tunde, who began the story as an innocent child asking a seemingly simple question, finds himself at the center of a much deeper understanding of relationships, loyalty, and redemption. His curiosity, which initially led to embarrassment and turmoil, becomes the catalyst for a broader, more profound awakening. Through the course of events, Tunde learns that love is not always as simple or as clear-cut as he once thought. Loyalty is not merely about being faithful in the good times, but about navigating through the complexities of life, even when faced with uncomfortable truths. The story teaches him that redemption is not just possible, but essential. That a person can make mistakes, but if they have the courage to seek forgiveness and make things right, they can be forgiven and grow. Tunde, once naive, now understands that relationships require work, that the ability to forgive and to seek forgiveness is what truly strengthens the bonds between people. Amara's role, the temptation of the past. Amara's role in the story is crucial in illustrating the seductive pull of the past. She represents the temptation to return to a time that was once cherished, but no longer exists. She had hoped that her relationship with Jide could be rekindled, but as the story unfolds, she comes to understand that Jide has changed. Time has passed, and the man she once knew has evolved, not necessarily for the worse, but for the better. The choices he made in his life, particularly his choice to remain with Funky, have led him to a place of stability and growth. Amara's departure from the village marks the end of a chapter, one that is both bittersweet and liberating. It symbolizes the need to let go of the past in order to make room for new possibilities. Her exit reflects the idea that we must move forward, leaving behind what cannot be reclaimed, in order to truly grow and find our place in the future. The strength of family, rebuilding and moving forward together. The heart of the story lies in the reconciliation between Jide and Funky. Their journey of forgiveness and healing is a testament to the power of family. Despite the hurt and betrayal, Funky's ability to forgive Jide and the couple's decision to rebuild their relationship is a reflection of the strength that lies in family unity. The reconciliation between husband and wife exemplifies the African belief that while family bonds may be tested, they are ultimately the foundation upon which a society is built. The story reminds us that love in a family is not without its challenges, but with effort, forgiveness, and mutual respect, even the deepest wounds can heal. This strength of family, despite imperfections, is an enduring value in African culture, a reminder that loyalty, love, and forgiveness are crucial to maintaining harmony and cohesion within the family unit and the community as a whole. Cultural reflection, the African values of family, integrity, and respect. The story concludes with a reflection on the core values that guide many African communities: family, respect, and integrity. These values are deeply embedded in the cultural fabric, where elders are respected, family is prioritized, and individual actions are seen as reflections of the community. In the context of this story, these values are put to the test. Jide's actions, his mistakes, and the resulting reconciliation with Funky and his family all highlight how these values are crucial for growth, healing, and harmony. Jide's journey illustrates the cultural expectation that one must be true to oneself, confront the past, and seek redemption where necessary. The resolution of the story demonstrates that while mistakes are inevitable, it is how one chooses to address those mistakes, with honesty, humility, and integrity, that ultimately defines a person's true strength. The narrative reaffirms the importance of family loyalty, the power of forgiveness, and the role integrity plays in the restoration of balance and peace. Final words: strength in acknowledging imperfection. The final reflection centers on human imperfection. Everyone, no matter how esteemed or respected, is bound to make mistakes. The true measure of strength, however, does not come from perfection, but from the willingness to face one's flaws, learn from them, and make amends. The moral of the story is clear. A man's true strength is not found in his ability to avoid mistakes, but in his ability to own them, seek forgiveness, and work toward a better future. Tunde, now wiser and more understanding, embodies this lesson as he looks ahead, ready to carry the lessons of love, loyalty, and redemption into his own life. The family, though imperfect, stands united. They have each learned valuable lessons about love, forgiveness, and the importance of integrity. As the story closes, we are reminded that while mistakes are part of being human, the real strength lies in our ability to acknowledge them and move forward with integrity, ensuring that the bonds of family and community remain unbroken.